Robert, and I'm the Chief of Staff of the Crypto Task Force. Welcome to another Crypto Task Force Roundtable. Today's panelists will be helping us to understand the intersection of distributed ledger technology and financial surveillance and privacy. Public permissionless blockchains facilitate radical transparency. Every transaction is recorded publicly on the distributed ledger, which by default means that any curious member of the public or government can view all transfers of value from one address to another. And although these transactions are pseudonymous, savvy investigators can often draw inferences about who owns what and who's trading with whom, information that can be of great value to good and bad actors alike. In today's roundtable, we'll be hearing from a number of technologists, entrepreneurs, lawyers, and advocates about how we should think about the balance between transparency and privacy, and between important government interests like national security and criminal deterrence, and fundamental American values like privacy and freedom. Legal and policy discussion of these issues needs to be informed by an understanding of the technological innovations that may help balance these apparently competing interests. Accordingly, some of our panelists will discuss specific technologies, projects, or products that are designed to achieve this balance. Please note the fact that discussion of a specific product or technology by any of our panelists today does not serve as an endorsement by the SEC of the project or the technology or of any affiliate of the project. The Commission does not endorse or sponsor any particular securities, issuers, products, services, professional credentials, firms, or individuals. Today's sessions will be moderated by Yaya Fanusi, who leads global policy engagement and regulatory strategy at the Aleo Network Foundation. Mr. Fanusi has more than 15 years of experience spanning government, policy, and the private sector across finance, national security, and blockchain innovation. Before joining Aleo, he was Director of Policy for AML and Cyber Risk at the Crypto Council for Innovation, where he still serves as a senior advisor. Before I turn the podium over to our commissioners, I would like to remind everyone that this event is being streamed live and is being covered by multiple media outlets. Accordingly, please be aware that all remarks by Commission officials, participants, and members of our audience will be on the record. In addition, please remember that the participants in today's roundtable speak on their own behalf and that their views do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission, the Commissioners, or members of the Commission staff. We're ready to begin. Mr. Chairman.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us. And Richard, thanks for your introduction to the conference. Let me first begin by thanking Commissioner Hester Peirce and the entire Crypto Task Force for organizing today's roundtable. I should also like to thank our distinguished group of panelists who are brave enough to come to Washington to provide their thoughts on financial privacy in the 21st century. But before I provide my own thoughts, I must echo what Richard just mentioned, that I must note that the views I express here today are my own as chairman and do not necessarily reflect those of the SEC as an institution or those of the other commissioners. Today's roundtable participants will wrestle with a question that, at its core, is a profoundly American question. Whether people can participate in modern finance without surrendering their privacy, This tension raises important questions. On the one hand, the federal government has an obligation to protect Americans from national security interests and threats, including through measures such as the Bank Secrecy Act, which Treasury and other agencies use to deter illicit finance. On the other hand, being free to conduct one's affairs, including financial affairs, free from government and other surveillance, is a core American value. Crypto has been a forcing function. providing a unique opportunity to consider this question in the context of 21st century technology. Since January, this administration has highlighted the importance of restoring power to individual Americans and entrusting them to manage their own affairs, including when it comes to crypto. For our part, the SEC must confront its own record in balancing investor protection and privacy. The Commission has established tools like the Consolidated Audit Trail, swap data repositories, and Form PF that it asserted were necessary to protect investors, detect fraud, and safeguard our markets. Unfortunately, the federal government's insatiable desire for data has expanded these tools in ways that increasingly put the liberty of American investors at risk and saddle them with costs that too often provide little benefit because the government does not even use all of the information that is submitted. For example, while the Commission created the CAT with a good intention of providing a clearer view of trading across markets, it became a powerful system that moved the SEC closer towards mass surveillance. That is why we have taken steps to scale back some of CAT's most sensitive data elements and to re-examine its scope and its cost. Friedrich von Hayek, in his book, The Fatal Conceit, decried the belief of many in government that the solution to problems is to get enough smart people in a room and then collect enough information that these all-knowing people will somehow forge a perfect solution to the problem at hand based on all of that information. Well, we've seen how poorly, maybe never, that has actually worked in practice. So how right Dr. Hayek was. With the advent of crypto, it's no great leap to imagine a steady migration toward a future where the government and a constellation of intermediaries can peer into almost every dimension of an individual's financial life. While regulators may have a voracious appetite for data, that proclivity is obviously and fundamentally incompatible with the kind of free society that has made America great. Regulators must therefore remain humble and principled as we embrace the opportunities that crypto presents. In the analog era, financial surveillance was naturally constrained by paper records, physical distance, and manual processes. These delays, while inconvenient for the government, naturally limited how much information the Commission could obtain about any American investor. However, these constraints have dramatically diminished in the digital era, which is why today's conversation about crypto and privacy-enhancing technologies is especially important. Public blockchains are more transparent than any legacy financial system ever built. Every movement of value is recorded on a ledger that anyone can inspect. Chain analytics firms are already exceptional at assisting law enforcement with linking on-chain activity to off-chain identities. In other words, pushed in the wrong direction, crypto could become the most powerful financial surveillance architecture ever invented. Indeed, if the instinct of the government is to treat every wallet like a broker, every piece of software as an exchange, every transaction as a reportable event, and every protocol as a convenient surveillance node, then the government will transform this ecosystem into a financial panopticon. At the same time, this technology allows for privacy-preserving tools that the analog world could not provide, such as zero-knowledge proofs, selective disclosure, and wallet designs that allow users to prove compliance without handing over their entire financial history or personal details to intermediaries or to the government. One can imagine systems where a regulated platform can demonstrate that its users have been screened without the ability to retain a permanent person-by-person map of every payment, trade, or donation. These tools will also help our markets to continue to function smoothly as they move on-chain. Complete financial transparency inherent to public blockchains can disincentivize important financial markets activity. For example, many institutions depend on the ability to build positions, test strategies, and provide liquidity without instantly telegraphing that activity to competitors and to predatory traders. If every order, hedge, and portfolio adjustment was suddenly visible in real time, we could invite front-running, copycat behavior, and pile-on dynamics that make it harder, not easier, for firms to manage risk. Market making and underwriting become far less attractive if every inventory balance or client flow is immediately exposed to the marketplace. This technology makes it possible to balance the government's interest in deterring threats to our national security and the American public's interest in privacy. But to best strike this balance, we must make certain that Americans can use these tools without immediately falling under suspicion. Shielding the lawful activity of our citizens from bulk surveillance while still ensuring that our government can perform these essential functions is the best way to protect both national security and our basic civil liberties, while also giving room for innovation to flourish. So the stakes here are high, and the questions before us carry profound and enduring implications. As we begin this roundtable, I am eager to hear more from our panelists about how we as a commission can protect Americans' privacy, as well as how crypto's privacy tools can lessen rather than increase the need for mass financial surveillance. Together, I am confident that we can shape a framework that ensures that neither technological nor financial advancements will come at the expense of personal freedoms. Unfortunately, other obligations are going to prevent me from attending the entire conference, but I'm thrilled to have been here to see you all today. And anyway, I thank you for your time and attendance, and I look forward to a robust discussion ahead and to reading what you all have to say. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, and let me echo the chairman's thank yous to the Crypto Task Force and the many others for organizing today's event, as well as for all of our panelists and participants, both here at the SEC, as well as those watching the live stream. Today's roundtable on financial surveillance and privacy focuses on a topic of fundamental concern to Americans. American history reflects a deep skepticism with regard to government intrusion in the private lives of individuals. Our founders sought to protect this interest in liberty by enacting the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which safeguards the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects from unreasonable searches and seizures. However, as Justice Antonin Scalia noted in his 2001 majority opinion in Kylo versus United States, quote, "It would be foolish to contend that the degree of privacy secured to citizens by the Fourth Amendment has been entirely unaffected by the advance of technology," unquote. The question, he continued, is what limits are there upon this power of technology to shrink the realm of guaranteed privacy? Technological advances promote financial market efficiency by decreasing transaction speed and increasing personal convenience. Today, individuals can transmit funds to family members and friends via mobile phones, while also employing such technologies for more complex financial transactions, such as protocol staking in crypto assets or storing value in such assets. In addition to offering speed and convenience-related advantages, such technologies can also reduce the need for intermediaries. These attributes raise questions insofar as how the Bank Secrecy Act should be applied or revised. Surveillance by governmental and private entities raises fundamental questions about the nature of individual privacy, as it should. Indiscriminate collection of vast amounts of personal data is inconsistent with a framework that values privacy and financial independence. The sheer scale of individual personal data that can be gathered and aggregated creates a tantalizing opportunity for abuse. This data can reveal sensitive information about financial and personal habits and individual preferences. The rise of new financial technologies means that we must continuously evaluate how to protect privacy and individual freedom for innocent Americans, especially when there will always be criminals and other bad actors that seek to use such technologies to harm others. How does the government balance the need to protect society against those persons while preserving privacy, freedom, and liberty for others? Furthermore, to what extent can financial technologies be used to increase individual privacy? Can tools such as zero-knowledge proofs provide verification tools while enhancing privacy rights? We must strive to promote a financial system that is both innovative and respectful of privacy and individual rights. Effective regulation can strengthen financial markets, promote economic stability by isolating wrongdoing, and protect consumers, while permitting the development of innovation that creates desired services and cost efficiencies. However, we should be mindful of not permitting a regulatory framework that creates an omnipotent financial surveillance system that instills fear of constant monitoring in every American. So thank you again very much for your time, especially coming to D.C. in this very, very cold, on this very cold day. Thank you for making it through all the ice and snow.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Commissioner Ueda for your remarks, and Richard for kicking us off. And thank you all for joining us, whether in person or online. We're excited to be here for our sixth roundtable today. Thank you especially to our moderator, Yaya Fanusi, and the panelists, the fabulous panelists that you'll be hearing from later today. And happy Bill of Rights Day. Last time when I spoke at length about privacy, I told the story of my grandfather in a telephone conversation of his that ended up being not so private. But my other grandfather lived on the other side of the ocean in the northern part of the Netherlands in a province called Friesland. And during the Nazi occupation, a German officer knocked on the door of the house, and he said he wanted his girlfriend to live in that house. So my mother, who was a very young girl at the time, was paraded in front of this German officer, and they said, "Look at this little girl. There are many more runny-nosed children where she came from. Are you sure you want your girlfriend to live in this house?" The officer did not want to do that, which was good because my grandfather, as an opponent of the occupiers, certainly could not have one of them living in his house. So even in less dire times, when the stakes are much lower than they were there, the idea of having an uninvited stranger living in your house, watching everything you do, is completely unthinkable. In this country, people have an expectation of privacy in their homes. The law sets up barriers to make it difficult for government surveillance of people suspected of no wrongdoing. But oddly, similar expectations and protections of privacy do not exist for our financial lives. The lack of privacy in this area of our lives is puzzling. After all, a walk through someone's financial transactions will tell the government, or someone else looking, potentially even more about someone than would a walk through her house. Legal developments, most notably the third-party doctrine, and the decades-long cultivation of an anti-financial privacy ethos in our national consciousness has made mass surveillance routine when it comes to our financial system. People assume, often correctly, that the government is watching their financial transactions, and they shrug it off. I have nothing to hide, they say. Our national degradation of financial privacy and the rules that embody it are overdue for a change, and crypto is helping to nudge a reassessment. On the one hand, crypto opens new possibilities for transactions without financial intermediaries that are central to our existing financial surveillance paradigm. Tokenized securities transactions, for example, can occur without the intermediation of a broker. As our personal transactions become increasingly disintermediated, government will receive less information about those transactions from their traditional channels. On the other hand, as has been mentioned, the public blockchains on which many crypto transactions take place are viewable by everyone, which creates a demand for privacy-protecting tools. Accordingly, as crypto usage increases, the public and relevant government agencies need to rethink when and how financial transactions are surveilled. Deep thought about financial surveillance and privacy issues as they relate to cryptocurrencies is not new. Some of our panelists and others, like Ian Myers and Matthew Green, have been thinking about these issues for many years. But new technological developments are broadening the conversation. Accordingly, the recently passed Genius Act, which regulates centralized stablecoins, directs Treasury to identify innovative or novel methods, techniques, or strategies that regulated financial institutions use or have the potential to use to detect illicit activity such as money laundering involving digital assets. That process is underway. Also in process are efforts to develop tools to enable law-abiding citizens to live private lives and protect themselves from bad actors. Some of them have been mentioned already today, zero-knowledge proofs. Mixers are another example. They enable people to make charitable donations, get paid, lend money to a friend, or engage in other legal transactions without telegraphing them to the world. And decentralized physical infrastructure networks, or DPIN, provide essential services without a central actor who can withhold these services to from disfavored people. At today's roundtable, we'll hear about these and other new technologies designed to protect the privacy of transactions occurring on public blockchains and to streamline compliance. The SEC does not endorse any particular product, of course, but understanding how these technologies work will help inform policymakers as they seek to address the threats that face this nation without undermining our civil liberties. Several themes should guide the government's work. Government should not assume ill intent when people take steps to guard their privacy. Protecting one's privacy should be the norm, not an indicator of criminal intent. Government should resist the temptation to force intermediation for the purpose of creating a regulatory beachhead or facilitating financial surveillance. Relatedly, the government should avoid imposing regulatory obligations, including Bank Secrecy Act obligations, on a software developer who does not have custody of users' assets or the ability to override users' choices. Additionally, government should pursue bad actors who use privacy-protecting tools for nefarious purposes while protecting good actors who develop and publish these tools and the law-abiding citizens who use them to protect themselves from bad actors. I look forward to hearing today from builders and policy professionals as they discuss how we can use new technologies to protect the nation and to preserve the liberties that make this nation so special, including the freedom to live a private life. What better day to have this conversation than today, Bill of Rights Day? Yaya, I'm going to hand it over to you and to the rest of the panelists, and we look forward to the discussions. Thank you.
All right, we're going to have our speakers come on up. Happy Bill of Rights Day, everyone. And a lot has been said, and as everyone gets set up, we're going to give everyone up here a chance to speak And just so you know, everyone here is involved in innovation. I think what the speakers this morning showed us is that technology is shaping us, but as policymakers, there's the need to make sure we can shape the technology so that we're not totally, we don't get shaped in a way that takes us from our principles. So what I'm going to do is I'll introduce each individual speaker and give them the opportunity to speak. I'm going to start with Jill Gunter. And Jill is co-founder of Espresso Systems. She's building the tools to make digital assets adoption mainstream. And she's conducted research on cryptocurrency adoption in the context of financial repression with the University of Oxford and beyond. And she previously traded Latin American debt and derivatives at Goldman Sachs. So Jill, I know you're going to come up and speak to us. We look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, commissioners, SEC staff members, my fellow industry representatives, and of course, all others in attendance and tuned in for the opportunity to talk to you today about what I think is one of the greatest opportunities that stands before us to improve how we safeguard our values, our liberties, our financial system, and I would say even our country. My name is Jill Gunter. I've worked in the cryptocurrency and digital assets industry for the last 10 years as a researcher and an entrepreneur. I founded and currently run a company called Espresso Systems that builds the tools needed to migrate mainstream financial services onto more efficient, safer, and global blockchain rails. I've built privacy tools for end users and institutions, and I've also been a user and a beneficiary of on-chain privacy tools in my own activities. Last week, as I was writing this speech, actually, I had a new experience with privacy tools. I was subject to a hack of one of my cryptocurrency wallets. I watched as thousands of dollars worth of stablecoins were drained out of that wallet into a privacy product. I've been in the industry for 10 years, and I've never been hacked before. There was a vulnerability in a smart contract that I had allowed to have access to my wallet months prior, and it was exploited to move funds without my consent, ultimately moving them into a privacy protocol to prevent my ability to further trace their movements. I honestly wondered if I should share this with this group today. But I think it's very important to begin by acknowledging that the broad category of privacy tools can and are frequently abused. Yet, I hope that you are convinced today that privacy is worth defending, that privacy is a pragmatic need, and that blockchain rails can support privacy products, and indeed are today supporting privacy products that do a better job of meeting compliance needs and protecting users than those products and systems that have existed in the financial system to date. Indeed, the fact that this next generation of products and services can meet compliance goals with less data collection and therefore less exposure of that data is, I would argue, the most compelling reason to adopt blockchains and to migrate the financial system towards digital assets. So I want to start with the notion that privacy, and particularly financial privacy, is worth defending. We have never lived in a world without cash or coins, if you go back far enough. Cash is a great product. Cash is an anonymous, bearer asset that's transacted peer-to-peer and therefore naturally protects the privacy of the user. But of course, cash is being phased out. More than ever, our lives are lived online, meaning an unprecedented amount of data is being collected on us, and particularly with the advent of consumer AI, is being made both legible and actionable to all kinds of entities. We don't need to jump straight to George Orwell to understand why we might want peer-to-peer private payments. We can look to reality in countries like China, which have implemented financial and social credit scoring based in part on the transaction histories of individuals. We can look also to countries with capital controls, places like Venezuela, where it's well-documented phenomenon that these policies, like capital controls, have outsized harm on the average person. In these places, the elite, the well-connected, the important institutions in those societies, they always have the means, and have for a long time had the means, of tunneling around policies like capital controls. Meanwhile, the average student, mother, small business owner is trapped in a broken system and an inflating currency. And cryptocurrency in the form of Bitcoin or stablecoins has for some time served as an important reprieve for these people. It's offered an escape hatch accessible to anyone with an internet connection, not just those personally well-connected in the oft-corrupt banking or government sectors in these regimes. The success of cryptocurrencies in securing civil liberties and as a mechanism for protecting civilians and humanitarian access is manifest not just in Venezuela, but amongst protesters in Canada who were shut off from their own financial accounts, to aid workers in Ukraine who initially struggled to raise resources in the fog of war, but ended up raising over $200 million of cryptocurrency in a matter of weeks to support their movement. Yet wherever there has been this success, I have found through my research that there has also been anxiety about the transparency of the blockchain technology that underpins it. Fortunately, for those whose lives, quite literally in some cases, have depended on it, privacy tools for digital assets have been live for the last decade and are only continuing to proliferate. But privacy is not just a moral imperative. It's not solely useful for the protection of civil liberties or as a dissident technology. Privacy is also, as we know, a practical requirement for the functioning of any financial system. You can see this at the individual level as well as at the institutional level. As was mentioned, I started my career as a bond trader on Wall Street, and there I saw firsthand the degree to which our financial system runs on trusted intermediaries. In so many areas of finance, we depend on middlemen to facilitate transactions and trades. And these middlemen become privy to all kinds of data, and they're not always equipped or incentivized to protect that data appropriately. Now, blockchains, of course, obviate middlemen in digital transactions, removing brokers by allowing counterparties to interact directly, and reducing clearing and settlement processes to computer programs that are run by nodes around the world. But blockchains not only do this, but they also enable new classes of technology that can support fresh paradigms around dynamics of identity and data disclosure. Through state-of-the-art implementations of cryptographic tools like zero-knowledge proofs and multi-party computation, we can prove all manner of things about ourselves, our institutions, or our portfolios without handing over credentials. We can prove that we are over the age of 21, according to our state-issued passport, without ever showing that passport itself. On a bigger scale, a bank can prove to the world that it meets its reserve requirements without publicly disclosing the details of its audit. A trading counterparty can prove that they aren't creating wrong-way risk exposure without revealing the identity of the institution. A fund manager can prove in real time that the assets in its portfolio meet the fund's mandate without compromising their competitive edge and disclosing the precise securities that it holds. Now, the only dynamics holding us back from this future are, number one, getting the world's assets onto these digital rails, which is happening at an accelerating pace, and number two, the embrace of this technology by our global systems of governance, including policymakers. I recall when I first started working on Wall Street, it was a few years after the 2008 financial crisis, and I heard from my colleagues that at all of the major banks, they were still sifting through the legacy counterparty exposure that they had to Lehman Brothers. I was blown away at the time by the challenges that existed in calculating this counterparty risk accurately in real time. The bottleneck was partly technological, with each institution running its own database with largely manual, human-led end-of-day reconciliation processes. But it was also partly due to the incentives of the institutions to maintain privacy over proprietary strategies and positions. Blockchains have exhibited no such issues. For all of the price volatility that blockchains have borne witness to over the last decade, liquidations in the decentralized financial sphere have consistently been orderly due to the fact that the risk in the system can be witnessed in real time and dealt with in real time. I want to emphasize that this does not change when you introduce privacy tools into these systems. Even when identities or amounts or assets are obfuscated, encrypted computation and zero-knowledge proofs give us the tools to still support real-time audits. The privacy products pioneered by the cryptocurrency and digital asset space provide us with the tools to solve all sorts of large-scale problems that have long plagued the global economy. My company, Espresso, invented and piloted a privacy product that allows for selective disclosure of information, configurable by the asset issuer. You'll hear in a moment from the founder of Zcash, the project that invented the very notion of on-chain privacy a decade ago and has driven much of the product innovation in the space. Other projects like Aztec and World and Self Protocol are driving real-world adoption of verifiable digital identity with ever-increasing importance in a world rife with data breaches and with bots. Oxbow, with its privacy pools product, has developed a pragmatic approach to offer on-chain privacy to legitimate users while excluding illicit actors, like whoever hacked my account. I could go on, but I'll cede my time to let the other builders in the room speak for themselves. I have been a builder and a user of privacy products in crypto. As of last week, you could also say that I've been a victim of a bad actor who made off with my funds behind the shield of a privacy protocol. And yet, I feel more conviction than ever that the great work being done by the founders, inventors, and advocates that we're surrounded by today will protect users, enable fair financial markets, and meet risk management goals better than we do today, both within crypto and in the context of the broader global economy. Thank you.
Jill, before you go, I just right before you go back to your seat, just real quick, we don't have a lot of time, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, because I think a lot of people will be wondering about this experience. Thank you for sharing what happened to you. Any advice, what is the lesson that you would share for those who are either in this space or considering and exploring this space? What advice do you have so that they can mitigate that risk of an exploit that you dealt with last week?
Yeah, thank you. And I want to emphasize, I mean, I have been working in this industry for a decade and never been hacked. So I wish the same for everyone here. I think that, if you are looking to get into the cryptocurrency space as a user, I think that the reality is that a lot of the products that have been built to date have been built with the notion of self-sovereignty in mind. So replicating cash. And just the same way that you have to be very diligent with your security if you're carrying cash around, perhaps, in fact, I should not have had that much digital cash in that wallet at that moment. You have to have that same level of vigilance. Self-sovereignty is expensive from a security perspective, but it's nonetheless deeply, deeply valuable. I would say for builders in this space, I have been, even just in the last 72 hours or so since this experience happened to me, I've been blown away by the receptivity of my fellow entrepreneurs and builders and developers in this space. I have actually been in touch directly with some of the folks who have built the privacy protocol into which my funds disappeared. They do have some safeguards. If I had caught this within 24 hours, they would have been able to actually halt the transaction. I was not so lucky this time. But I'm talking to them about, okay, what is the appropriate sort of duration of time that we should be able to have those types of buffers and safeguards in place. And so that's something that I really want to emphasize, is that I think that across the board, entrepreneurs in this space are very receptive to that kind of feedback.
Thank you, Jill. Next, we'll bring up Zuko Wilcox, who, as Jill mentioned, is one of the co-founders of Zcash and also the Chief Product Officer at Shielded Labs. And from here on out, we will have slides. Our speakers will be speaking to slides, so you can see that on the screen. Zuko, take it away. You've got a few minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Well, thank you all for being here in person and online. I'm Zuko. I've worked for about 30 plus years in the field of computer security, and I think of privacy as just one aspect of computer security. And I prepared some slides mostly to show you how Zcash works. But first, a message from my mom. So my mom called me a couple days ago. She was real excited that she heard I was going to come talk here. And she said, I want you to tell them the following. And so I wrote it down. Now, my mom is 77 years old. She was born in 1948 on a small family farm in New Mexico. And she spent her whole life teaching grade school children and middle school children and me, my brothers. And now she's teaching her grandchildren. So we should listen to her, okay? Here's what my mom says. Number one, mass surveillance makes us a guinea pig. This hasn't ever been done before. Number two, not all amendments affect everyone, but the Fourth Amendment affects everyone who has a computer and a phone. And then she said, the Constitution guarantees us freedom against unreasonable search and seizure, but now it is happening and there isn't even a judge who signs off on it, and it is wrong. My mom.
Mama Zuko, she's coming through.
Okay, so I'm really glad to be here. The first thing I got to get out of the way is that so Zcash. Okay, first I got to tell you what Zcash is. Zcash is like Bitcoin, which is an open, decentralized, open source system. Anyone in the world can run the software on their computer. And when they do, their computer becomes part of the Zcash network. No one can stop them. They don't need permission from anyone. And Zcash is like Signal with the end-to-end encryption. You guys know how Signal works? I'm going to assume everyone knows how Signal works. It's end-to-end encrypted. So if someone sends you a message to your phone, then only their phone and your phone are the only copies of that message that anyone can see, thanks to end-to-end encryption. So Zcash is a combination of Bitcoin open network and Signal end-to-end encryption. And and the other fact about Zcash is there's only 21 million Zcash coins, just like there's only 21 million Bitcoins. Now, we created Zcash 10 years ago at this point. Along the way, we had to productionize this technology called zero-knowledge proofs, which I think every speaker has mentioned so far. We took it from being a theoretical computer science idea to being a industrial-grade product that you could rely on. And then, a few years ago, under the former chairman Gensler, we received a subpoena saying my then company and I personally were being investigated for fraud. And I was angry about that, and I'm still angry about it because it was unjust, and it was an insult to my character. And doing that, well, I called this person I respect and trust who probably knows everyone and everything in the crypto industry. And this person told me, I think every crypto company in America has received that same subpoena. And he said, I actually suspect that their motivation is just to bleed innocent American crypto companies with legal fees. So that's another reason I'm angry about it, is that it was not protecting, it was harming Americans by that. So at great expense for our tiny company, we answered, sent them all of the information that their subpoena requested, and then we never heard back. Until now, when the new SEC has invited me to explain Zcash to you, so I'm grateful. I'm grateful to that. I'm grateful to them for inviting me here for this. Okay, so in 30 plus years of working on computer security, I've come up with one simple thing I want to tell you today. It's not about privacy. Privacy is sharing less information. And that's good sometimes for some purposes. And this is not, the most important thing isn't transparency. Transparency is sharing more information, and that's good sometimes for some purposes. What I think is the most important thing that this new technology brings up is agency. It's who chooses what gets shared and what doesn't get shared. Who chooses? And that's the number one thing I hope you take away is in every other, someone's advocating for a policy or they're pitching a product, I want you to think to yourself, in this policy, in this product, who chooses? That's the most important question. Okay, now for the meat of my talk. How to Zcash. There is this wallet that is not made by me or my company. The people who make this wallet have nothing to do with me or my company. It's just that it's the easiest wallet to use to experience for yourself how the technology works. It is so easy that if you open the App Store right now, you can probably keep up with me in real time and get this installed before my talk ends in 4 minutes. So you open up the App Store and you see that little button where you download. Okay, you click that and it'll look like this. This is called Zashi. I can see one person doing it. Keep going. And then you click, it says either restore existing wallet or create a new wallet. So you click create a new wallet and it says you have 0 Zcash. Okay. Then you click the receive button and then you click the QR code button. Okay, you don't have to do this part yet. Just once you get it installed and create a new wallet, then you're good. And then hit me up during the break and I'll send you 1,000th of a Zcash. Or if that violates some kind of ethics rule, I'll send you 0 Zcash. Because I'll show you, Zcash doesn't just involve end-to-end encryption of the transactions and the transaction information. You can also include a memo with the, it's like when we used to have checks and you would write the memo, the purpose of the check in the corner. So it's like that. You can send a little message with your transaction. So if you want, I'll send you 0 Zcash with a message just so you can see how it works. Anyway, when you click the QR code, it just pops up this, and that's all. Now, you show your phone to me or to any other Zcasher, and they scan it, and then you'll see this. See, it says, hi, welcome to Zcash-Zuko. See, there's a message that comes with it, right? And now at this point, you have 0.001 Zcash in your phone, and this is the most high agency money you can have because it's purely digital, it works over the internet, and because of the question of who chooses, right? This 0.001 Zcash, no one in the world other than you with your phone, see this button that says send? No one else can push that button but you, right? So what is done with this money at this point is your and your alone moral responsibility. And the unique thing about Zcash that we had to do all this computer science years ago is that history, see it says you received 0.001 Zcash earlier today, the history of incoming and outgoing transactions. Who chooses how this information is shared? Who gets to see your history of transactions? Do you want to show it to your accountant or to your mom or to your friend or to proper subpoena or search warrant or something? Who chooses all that? Just like with the pay button, there is no one else in the world that can click the share button. Anyone who is just you, who owns and controls your phone, is the only answer currently in Zcash to the question of who chooses. That's it. That wallet was made by someone else. They deserve all the credit. This is me. And don't forget, think about everything from that perspective. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Zuko. And I have a question for you as you head back to your seat. So does Mama Zuko use Zcash?
Oh yeah.
Yeah? All right.
Oh yeah, all the time. She's a pro.
All right. Okay, good. Not far from
You
the
can buy burritos from Chipotle with Zcash.
Okay.
He takes me out for lunch.
All right. Thank you. So next on continuing our speaker here, we have Co. Co is CEO of the Alio Net. Next we have Co. Co is CEO of the Alio Network Foundation and previously served as head of special projects and business development at MobileCoin. He has served honorably in the U.S. Navy and is presently in the U.S. Naval Reserves. Take it away, Co.
Test us. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, SEC, for having us out here. Like Yaya mentioned, my name is Ko, and I'm the CEO of the Alio Network Foundation. Today, I'm going to discuss what we call smart money and smart privacy. To frame this discussion, I want to distinguish between two types of blockchains. We have open blockchains and closed blockchains. Other ways you might hear them described are permissionless blockchains and permissioned, decentralized or centralized. At a high level, the easiest way to think about this is to think about the difference between the internet or intranets. Open blockchains or decentralized blockchains, actually I'm going to start with closed blockchains. Closed blockchains and permission blockchains are like corporate intranets. They require you to, someone needs to allow you to join them, and they're walled off from the rest of the world. Also, innovation is limited to whatever the owner of that network allows for. Open blockchains or decentralized blockchains are much more akin to the open web. Anyone with an internet connection, that, like the commissioner previously mentioned, is able to access and participate in those networks. For the purposes of this discussion, we're going to be focused on open, decentralized blockchains because we believe those are the optimal blockchains or the optimal paths to build a truly global financial network. Within the open blockchain ecosystems, we've seen an evolution across two axes. On one axis, we have programmability, and the other axis, we have privacy. At the top left, we have Bitcoin, which is not programmable and fully exposed. Every single transaction that's ever occurred on the Bitcoin network is publicly visible on a ledger for everyone to see. Right below Bitcoin, we have Zcash, which is what Zuko just demoed. Zcash is encrypted Bitcoin. At the top right, we have Ethereum. Ethereum is Bitcoin, but they added smart contracts. Ethereum is programmable. What does that mean? It means that Ethereum allows for counterparties to send tokens back and forth just like Bitcoin, but you can do much more than just send tokens. You can do swaps, you can trade, you can lend assets, you can take loans, you can issue new assets, real-world assets, you can issue tokenized equities. Programmable blockchains like Ethereum enabled something what we call decentralized finance, or DeFi. And most importantly, they led to the rise of stablecoins. But Ethereum still has one issue. It's not private. Ethereum is essentially Twitter for your bank account. And that's where Alio comes in. Alio takes the decentralization of Bitcoin, the programmability of Ethereum, and the privacy of Zcash, and combines them into a single, open, decentralized blockchain. And as a matter of fact, the same researchers who laid out the groundwork for Zcash, two of whom I think are here, Ian Myers and Matt Green, they're the same researchers that assisted in the development and research for Alio. After they launched Zcash, they realized that privacy without programmability was going to be insufficient for 21st century finance. And so Alio is an answer to that solution, or to that problem. All right, so why does privacy matter? Why do we care about privacy when it comes to blockchains? In the early days of the internet, everything ran on HTTP. You couldn't conduct business on the internet because it was insecure. If you tried to enter credit card information on HTTP, anyone online would be able to see that information and potentially steal that information. Then we saw SSL and TLS come on the scene, which enabled HTTPS. And HTTPS unlocked e-commerce. Suddenly, you were able to do things like online banking in a secure capacity. It gave birth to the tech giants that we know today and enabled the modern internet economy. Because these innovations were fostered in the United States, the internet, HTTPS is what I'm referring to, American companies, American citizens, and America as a whole benefited the most from this tremendous amount of value that was created. And we find ourselves at a similar juncture right now in terms of Web3 and crypto. We're at the cusp of that same transition of going from the HTTP world of crypto, where everything is exposed and transparent, to privacy-preserving blockchains, or what we call internally as the HTTPS of crypto. You can think of Aleo as an HTTPS layer for blockchains. And if we want the next generation of tech giants to be founded here in the United States, we need to make sure that we're creating or supporting regulation or policies that enable innovation like HTTPS to flourish and not suffocate. Need some water, Paul? All right. All right, this was kind of covered a little bit earlier, so I'm going to kind of breeze through this, but this is real on-chain data. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive for people who are less familiar with how blockchains work. We had one of our employees, we'll call her Maya Collins, conduct real transactions last week on-chain. And because she conducted these transactions on an exposed blockchain, it's one of the prominent blockchains out there, we can see, trace, and track all of her on-chain activity, past, present, and future. You can see when her wallet was funded, what she did with the funds from her wallet, like she bought some Bitcoin, she bought some coffee at a crypto cafe. We can also see what her balance is today. And like I said, this is a real wallet address. You can verify all this data on-chain yourself. Every detail of her on-chain activity, sender, receiver, amount, time, is recorded and exposed for everyone to see permanently. This level of exposure is unacceptable, I think, for most businesses. No global company that I know of is going to conduct payroll or move supply chain data onto a ledger that anyone, including their competitors, will be able to see and analyze at any given point in time when it comes to financial activity. Yet this is how most blockchains work. Let's take a quick look of these same transactions on a privacy-preserving blockchain like Zcash or Aleo. These same transactions occur, but they're private. You still get the same benefits of participating on an open, decentralized network, but the details of your financial activity are encrypted. And I think this is what we expect in the modern day in terms of finance. So now we have to address the elephant in the room. And originally there's supposed to be an elephant on this slide. But I know we have a bunch of folks from different agencies in this room that are wondering, if transactions on a blockchain are encrypted, how do you conduct risk mitigation? And the answer lies in what we call smart privacy. Smart contracts, programmability, on privacy-preserving blockchains allow businesses and companies to construct policies that are enforceable on-chain so that they can meet their specific risk mitigation requirements. For example, Paxos and Circle, two major stablecoin issuers, who, by the way, recently announced that they're going to be supporting some of the first privacy-preserving stablecoins, or ZK stablecoins, on Aleo. Companies like that need to meet specific requirements in order to operate in the United States. They can define these requirements via smart contracts and programmatically enforce them. They can implement things like identity checks, verified credentials, selected disclosures, or they can even program stablecoins to have a certain cooling off period. Because everything is programmable, the sky is the limit. They can pick and choose the specific tools that they need in order to meet their unique requirements when it comes to risk mitigation. And this is important because risk mitigation is not one size fits all. Things like risk mitigation vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. What might be required in the United States will be different from Europe versus LATAM or Africa, the Middle East, Asia. But what smart privacy enables is flexibility. It allows for builders, companies, and businesses to come up with acute solutions without breaking the main benefits of participating on an open global network. I think Nikhil and Wayne are actually going to go a little bit deeper into some of the risk mitigation that occurs on-chain, so I'll let them do that during their presentations. But in closing here, smart money and smart privacy on open, decentralized blockchains unlock the next generation of payments and commerce. We know that a form of privacy is inevitable. The question is, which one do we adopt and how do we get there? Are we going to force finance into closed permission systems, walled gardens that are going to be run by corporations or foreign entities? Or are we going to embrace open systems that embody economic or American ideals like freedom and innovation? The US is in a unique position to lead here. But if regulation or policies are overly constrictive or narrow, builders, companies, and businesses are going to move offshore, and we'll miss out on Web3. And with that, we'll miss out on all the innovation and value creation that occurs. But I'm optimistic. That's why I'm here engaging. Thank you very much for the SEC for having us. And I think actually, just for anyone who's here, we have a happy hour at the end of all of this, just so you guys know that some of the panelists co-sponsored. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out. Meet us there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ko. And as you go back, before you sit down, you said something. You said the U.S. is in the position or a position to lead. Break that down for us. Why?
Because all the tech talent of the world is still, the center of gravity is the United States. Period. The end, right? The US leads innovation on multiple different tech industries, including crypto.
Thank you. Thanks, Ko. Next, coming up will be Simon Latorte. Simon is head of strategic initiatives at Digital Asset, the creators of the Canton Network. And he was previously head of financial engineering and digital at Société Générale. Simon, take it away.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, SEC Chairman and Commissioners, for inviting us today. Today's topic is really interesting to me. Privacy and regulatory supervision in a blockchain world. I spent most of my career trading derivatives for a bank, so privacy and regulatory compliance is kind of a second nature. But I spent the past few years building blockchain technology, where the best known blockchain is Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is fully transparent, there's no privacy, and censorship resistance, there's very limited regulatory oversight. So the question is, how do you reconcile privacy and regulatory supervision with blockchain technology? And I'll speak about that today in 3 parts. First, why privacy and regulatory supervision matter. Second, I'll detail how some blockchain models are designed for censorship resistance and some other are designed for privacy. And I'll finish giving a highlight of where we stand in terms of adoption of blockchain in the financial markets. So first, why does it matter? It's been, I think, well covered already. So similarly to retail use cases or commerce use cases, I'll take a use case that is more familiar to my knowledge, asset management. And I think Commissioner Peirce mentioned it. If you're an asset manager and all your trades are public, it's quite easy for someone to clone the strategy and then take all the alpha that you generate. So clearly, if you think about it, treasurer, asset manager, banks expects privacy when they trade, when they run their businesses. Now, what about regulatory supervision? If everything's encrypted and no one is able to analyze trade, how could we prevent bad behavior such as, let's say, front running or insider trading? So the question is, how can blockchain technology provide both the privacy and at the same time allow for proper supervision and monitoring? So I'll detail some blockchain models and I think we need to go slightly deeper in the tech stack, like Co mentioned, to better understand how this can be done. I'll give an overview of two blockchain models, one open, fully replicated model, and one open segmented model. The first one is here. It's where the data is fully replicated. It's what underpins Bitcoin or Ethereum. So let's have a look. You have a user that creates a transaction, and that transaction, that smart contract, is replicated on all the nodes in the network. The main benefits of that, in my opinion, is that it becomes censorship resistant. Let's say some nodes are taken down, and you may remember that China at some point banned Bitcoin mining, for instance. The fact that some nodes are taken down doesn't impact the overall system. It's resistant to censorship. So this is, I think, a very smart use of smart contract technology to create, I would call that digital gold or Bitcoin, a currency that is not linked to any government. And I think it's a great example of use of the technology. If you think about it, if you're old enough to remember Napster and think about the digital music industry, Bitcoin is like Napster or BitTorrent. You have peer-to-peer music, you copy the music everywhere, and the music sharing system cannot be shut down by authorities. And I think it's a very similar application here. The currency system cannot be shut down. Now I'll go over a second class of protocol that can provide privacy on blockchain. And it's kind of an alternative to zero-knowledge proof. This class of protocol segments the data instead of replicating the data everywhere. So if we stay on the MP3 music analogy, this is more like your Spotify or Netflix. You stream a given song or a given financial transaction to specific computers or specific entities. You don't replicate the transaction everywhere. So here we can have party A on the top left, trading with party B on the top right. The smart contract is created, the data is encrypted and routed through a set of entities to the counterparties that are involved. So here just party A of party B, but you can imagine that the custodians of that asset manager could be involved. Potentially the regulator could be involved and receive some part of the transactions. That has a main benefit. Of course, the first is privacy. Only the entities involved in a given transaction are aware of the details of the transaction. It also provides the ability to properly supervise. As I said, some subset of the data could be sent to the relevant supervising entity. So if it's a US security, it would go to the SEC. If it's a European security, it would go to the European regulation. There will be no full transmission of the entire data to like an omniscient database. And a side benefit is scalability, which is important when we're talking about institutional financial markets. With this data segmentation, it's easy to parallel process transaction. You can imagine that entity C would trade with entity D at the bottom at the same time as A and B would be trading. This is not really possible in the fully replicated model when you need to wait the entire network to have reached consensus to process the next transaction. So the scalability in terms of parallel processing is pretty strong with that model. And in addition, in terms of data storage, if you think that you have to store all the transactions everywhere, this becomes a very challenging data storage topic. Imagine that you have the Netflix catalog of movies on everybody's computer. That doesn't really work. And to continue kind of demystifying the technology and how do you provide blockchain with privacy, I'm giving here an example of how a smart contract looks like when you implement privacy. The top part are the terms and conditions. So you have the name of the asset called asset. You have who's involved, the issuer. You have some identifier, let's say a QSIP and ISIN, maybe the coupon rate of that bond. So that's the top part, description. The middle part is kind of who signs, who observe. Think about DocuSign. It's the people who sign the contract and the people who receive the copy of the contract. So you define here who are the parties that are able to act on the contract. And the bottom part is kind of the life cycle. What action can be done on that asset? Here you can see a transfer action is possible. So you can transfer the asset, and you define who can do it. Who controls that transfer? The controller is called the owner. So whoever owns that asset at that time is able to transfer that asset. And who's informed? Maybe the regulator is an observer and can receive a copy of the trade details or a subset of the trade details. So I'm sharing these fairly technical trade details to show that migrating to blockchain with privacy is not that difficult. It doesn't need a complete bing bang on the industry. The smart contracts are very similar to term sheets. The privacy can be maintained so that the asset manager, the treasurer of a corporation, and the regulator can be informed of their trade and only their own trade, or the regulator is informed of the trade that are under their scope. And so to recap, if we look at the two models I presented, the first one is really strong when you do full replication, when you have a censorship resistance need. And when you're fine with having full transparency. The fully replicated model is perfect when you're creating digital gold or Bitcoin. It's kind of the Napster analogy I made earlier. The second one, where the data is segmented, is really well suited when you need privacy and a granular supervision of who can see what, where the data is stored. That segmented model, in that case, in my opinion, is more appropriate. Now I'm going on to the section of where do we stand in terms of adoption of blockchain, specifically for regulated assets. So if we take the big picture of the crypto industry, you have like 3 trillion of crypto assets. The biggest part is Bitcoin, ETH, who are like censorship-resistant currencies. Then you have a subset of stable coins, probably 300 billion of stable coins that we discussed before. But if you look at the securities, the treasuries, the bonds, the funds, you see that the top 4 chains, 3 of them are privacy-enabled chains: Canton, Provenance, and ZK Sync. And I think it's not a surprise. For assets that are regulated, privacy matters, and these are the chains that so far have been able to tokenize these assets. So to conclude, when it comes to institutional use cases, I'm really convinced that the broader adoption requires a blockchain that provides both privacy and also is able to allow regulators to prevent abuse, such as front-running and insider trading. I think that the fully replicated blockchain model, the Napster model, is great for censorship-resistant use cases, like BTC or Zcash. But I think for regulated markets, such as US securities, the segmented model, the Spotify approach, is better suited because it can provide privacy and also the compliance that is required. And so consequently, the blockchain that so far have been able to provide privacy are the ones that are starting to be adopted. But as we saw, like these few hundred billions is still a small fraction of the trillions that are traded every day in the market. And so we still have a very long journey ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon. I think what we're going to do is we want to make sure we have time for Q&A, so I won't keep asking questions. Unless the audience has a question now for a speaker, you can ask. But what we'll do is from here on out, we will have questions. We'll have Q&A at the end. So I'm going to move us right on to our next presenter, Nikhil Raghuvira. And Nikhil is co-founder and CEO of Predicate, a blockchain infrastructure company built for programmable policy enforcement, and a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomic Center. Nikhil, it's on you.
Thank you. All right. Looks like everyone can hear me. Hey, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Nikhil, co-founder and CEO of Predicate. Thanks, Yaya. And thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you to the SEC for hosting this as well. All right. So what I'll be talking about is on tokenized securities, right? We're at the SEC, so I thought it would make sense for us to talk a little bit about how that might be possible. All right, so I think some of the core fundamental pieces really for how we should be thinking about a tokenized securities market in the first place when it comes to blockchains is first, of course, it being issued on a blockchain, right? That's where we have to start from. Another part is essentially smart contract enablement, right? So the ability to actually have programmatic execution for a transaction requires smart contract functionality when we think about a marketplace. You also need observability, which of course can run counter to what we're talking about from a privacy standpoint of how do you actually ensure securities in which there might be some observability that's required as necessary to meet securities obligations. And then of course the last piece is around how do you actually set rules for who can interact with the primary market issuance of a securities market. And so it actually comes down that privacy is critical for the adoption of tokenized securities. And I think folks have actually already been talking about this the entire time, right? So how do you keep trading strategies to be proprietary? How do you ensure market integrity? How do you prevent front running? And if we look at live blockchains that enable full privacy, it would be folks like Aleo, as well as Canton. But then I think this is where we have to start really thinking about the more complex part, right? So a regulated market, if you're going to build tokenized securities, really requires permissionless infrastructure. And I want to emphasize that. If everyone walks out of this room and thinks that, oh, great, you should have tokenized securities on a fully permissioned system that is centralized, that would be the wrong takeaway from this talk. The real thing here is actually that it should be built on permissionless infrastructure. And there's a reason for that. And I think some of this text got disappeared at the top. But the first part is that when we really think about it, permissionless infrastructure allows for interoperable liquidity across jurisdictions. Really what we're talking about here when we talk about blockchains is a global system, right? It's not one that is centered around one specific group, but rather how do we have an entire system that is able to operate globally? No different from HTTPS, as Ko talked about. That only works if you have a permissionless system. The other part is we've talked about the importance of self-custody. And again, a permissionless system allows for that. And then lastly, the programmability, right? So when we think of programmability, it is really for the aspect of open innovation. The moment you have closed systems, you don't allow for that open source innovation that is really where blockchains shine. And this is the same for decentralized finance. So it's an important point here to consider that it's both about blockchains as well as a decentralized finance. And so examples of this in real life are Ethereum, Aleo, Uniswap, Aave, a lot of these different groups that are building both open blockchains as well as open financial infrastructure. So then when we turn to securities, how this can actually work for securities is custom interoperable applications that operate on top of permissionless infrastructure. You're not replacing them, but rather you're thinking about how you can build on top of permissionless infrastructure that sits there. The best example of that is actually what Uniswap allows you to do. So that you have the Uniswap protocol that is a permissionless decentralized exchange. And then they build systems called hooks. Hooks allow you to set custom requirements for new types of applications that sit on top of the Uniswap infrastructure. And that's really important because now you can have Uniswap that I can go and use for a different use case that has nothing to do with securities. It can be entirely for commodities. A different group in India can use Uniswap for a completely different use case. And then someone in the United States who's thinking about securities can use Uniswaps for their specific use case without affecting me or that developer or that organization in India. That's really important. And then the same thing you can do, given that you have open source technology, is when we talk about a new application, you can also fork that code and create a custom implementation. And so a really good example of that is what Aave has done with Aave Horizon. Aave Horizon allows for securities to be used within their system, but it is a separate instance. And so other groups that have been using this type of infrastructure is Denari, for example, on tokenized securities, as well as Plume, who's building custom vault infrastructure as well. So again, the important part here is all this operates on top of decentralized infrastructure. And so how this works, to actually show a diagram, is here you have a front end, and then you have a USDC paired with a tokenized security, which sits independent of an Ethereum USDC pool, which can sit independent of a Solana USDC pool. So again, these can all coexist, all of this because you have common infrastructure. If you don't have common infrastructure, this breaks down. Then we get into the next part. So how do I, if I'm creating a tokenized securities market, set rules for, hey, certain users should not actually be able to access this because they need to be accredited investors. They need to be an approved institution. And so that's when you come into programmable policy infrastructure, which is where we specialize as well. And so this can also sit on top of DeFi at a smart contract level. And so here, essentially, you have a financial application that utilizes policy infrastructure that sits off of the blockchain, that is called via an API, and then it's enforced at a smart contract level. So every transaction is enforced to ensure that only an accredited investor can go and buy that tokenized security. So when you pair that together from the earlier image, you now have a specific USDC tokenized security pool in which only accredited investors who are KYC or KYB have the appropriate requirements, are allowed to buy a certain volume, all of those things. You're able to essentially set those requirements. And again, this has no effect on the Ethereum USDC pool or the Solana USDC pool. And then the last part here is actually when we think about the different identity systems itself. And so this is where there's a really unique opportunity when we think about the fact that you have zero knowledge proofs and the fact that I shouldn't have to disclose all of my information at once, right? So my investor accreditation is something that I should actually be able to provide via zero knowledge proof. I should be able to show that I'm over a certain age. I have various requirements met. That can be paired with zero knowledge proofs. But then there's going to be plenty of things that don't involve zero knowledge proofs, or there'll be certain organizations that say, look, like you have certain information, we're going to store that privately. And I would imagine many fintechs might be thinking of it in that world. And so again, you should actually be able to pair both on-chain zero knowledge proof identity as well as off-chain data systems together. And then the last part, of course, is, again, you have data sitting on a blockchain as well. If a user has self-custody over that, they should be able to provide certain proofs of that information. Again, all of these pair together to be able to say, hey, look, I am someone who has a right, who has the ability to be able to buy this tokenized security. And an example of a group that's been doing that recently is someone like Aztec, who has incorporated both zero knowledge proofs as well as off-chain systems for more regulated activity. So all of this, again, is real. It's not something that's theoretical. This has all been done. And so then we can pair that with another diagram, of course, here, which is I'm an investor who has a wallet. I go on a front end, and I said, hey, I want to buy this security. And I need to go and submit my investor creditor information. I can do so. And that could be either I already hold a zero knowledge proof of it, I can generate that, or the asset issuer, the broker dealer, can say, submit your company information, right, to show that you are based in the United States, that you meet our requirements. And if they do that, they're then able to go and say, let me go and buy this asset. And so that's when you can actually pair all those different pieces together, which is you can start from the beginning, going from no accreditation to getting accreditation, having the right requirements, and then being able to participate in an on-chain securities market to be able to buy a tokenized security, all while ensuring that it operates on top of a permissionless blockchain in a privacy-preserving manner. And so to recap, adoption of tokenized securities requires privacy. It's absolutely essential. And it requires permissionless rails. None of this will work without that. And I think the other part here is that we have the opportunity to be able to utilize more and more data that is self-contained, that is held by us for privacy-preserving reasons, but also to be able to incorporate any other data that is not quite there yet for things that are not fully private, that sit within centralized data companies. Those can also still be available. And lastly, all of that can be paired together for real-time enforcement in a programmatic manner. And all of that is possible today, in which we can have on-chain privacy and programmable compliance in order to unlock real-world adoption of tokenized securities. And so with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. And to round up our speakers, let's bring up Wayne Chang. And Wayne is founder and CEO of Spruce ID, whose mission is to let people control their identity and data across all their digital interactions. So Wayne, we're going to let you round up the speaking, and then we'll have Q&A and prepare for the next segment.
Thanks. Super grateful to be up here. Thank you so much for the task force for having us. I'm going to be talking about a lot of these components that we went over about the next generation financial system. Why is this important to Americans at all? Well, I think that making sure that everyone has access to an opportunity to prosperity is critical. It solves a lot of problems, and it can revitalize the middle class and a bunch of things important to Americans. So I think that ownership is one of the fastest ways to that and the most tenable ways to that. So if we can reduce friction around that and also get rid of all the fraud, all the waste that we see in terms of money going to bad actors and all these other areas, right? This is why it's really important and why I'm grateful to be here. So basically, we want to have systems that are secure. We want them to be usable. We want them to be accessible for people, so that you're not discriminated against based on, things that are protected, like your age, your beliefs, et cetera. It needs to work for everyone. And also, it needs to be seamless. People have learned to expect a certain level of user experience. To be able to use your phone and pay for things, everyone has that experience, right? Why is it so antiquated in other parts of the system? This is a big opportunity to modernize how we do business. And I think that there are bigger security problems related to how the financial industry and just in general identification works. A lot of these have to do with identity. You've heard that over and over again about digital identity. And think about how collection happens today, right? If you are trying to open a bank account, sometimes you have to hold up your passport to the webcam or your driver's license. You might even have to do that for fast food delivery or anything else that you do in the world, right? So a lot of the protections that are built into the physical identity cards are not meant for the digital world. The holograms that flash when you move the card around, how it bends, all the other features, right, that are built in for physical in-person inspection, that doesn't work when you're just taking a static image picture over a webcam, right? So a lot of these models can now also be generated by generative AI. So AI can generate a picture of you holding your driver's license or your passport, right? So it's really hard to understand if that's authentic or not. And I think that even worse, a lot of these things are collected in one central place, right, only to be hacked. You can look at the news articles about how pictures of passports, driver's license, and et cetera are all just revealed on the dark web because someone got breached, right? And all that data just went out there. Now attackers and fraudsters can use that information, create synthetic identities in your likeness, and ruin your credit or any of these other horrible things, right? So the model was basically adjusted from a paper in-person world, and we've overstretched that to the digital world, right? So as part of modernizing the financial sector, we have to look at what do we build that AI can't destroy when used in the wrong hands? And with the proliferation of open source models, the wide availability of compute through AI factories, it's going to get more and more severe with these attacks, right? So we have to build the new world on security mechanisms that AI can't break. Things like cryptography, things like humans showing up in person, things like liveness tests that are provably resilient against AI. These are all considerations that we have to bring into the modern financial system, and also we can do so without overexposing people's privacy. There's no reason why you have to give every single facet of data when you're applying for a financial account, an investment account, or anything else. It can produce a lot of friction and a lot of over-collection, or even opportunities to discriminate based on attributes that are not relevant to banking or buying a financial security or things of that nature, right? So what are some pathways ahead, right? I think that it's also important to call out that this is reminiscent to the Office of Personnel Management hack that happened many years ago, but is still fresh in the memory of a lot of privacy advocates, about how a lot of background checks for federal employees were basically compromised and exposed. I think that we've seen companies have a good track record of managing private keys and cryptographic keys, but whenever we start to put a bunch of data into one big silo, it seems that it inevitably gets hacked. So is there a way, are there architectures that we can use that don't require that? So I think that there's a way that we can achieve this through giving the user more digital autonomy. We want, instead of people basically logging into platforms that are big silos controlling everything about them, that the platform asks the user, what data can I access? And the user has an opportunity to consent and understand what the terms are for that data to the right policies, right? And it's really important that the tech and policy work in tandem. I'm going to be showing you some examples of what this future could look like and how it relates back to a lot of these networks that we've been talking about. One example is our partnership with the California DMV, where we have implemented the mobile driver's license to be a privacy-preserving digital identity that is controlled by Californians. It's provisioned to their phones. We issue the identity to the user. They choose which wallet they want to use, so you give the user more choice. And we put a lot of provisions there to make sure that it is surveillance-free and fully controlled by the user in terms of the ability to disclose data to the counterparty. Recently, the community colleges in California has announced their integration with the DMV wallet to give students access to benefits and other programs through this streamlined digital mechanism. Much more secure and convenient than trying to hold your driver's license up to the webcam and think about trying to scale a program to millions if you're requiring everyone to come in person, right? So this is about efficiency, this is about lowering fraud and streamlining the process. So this is what it looks like, just in case you want to see what some of the innovation in digital identity looks like. Please play the video. So you're at the community college website. This is a test credential only, and you're able to basically disclose the fields to the website for purposes of identity verification. Very fast if you think about how much you spend time on, maybe you've seen your kids use the Common App or fill out all these different forms for college applications, right? If we make things digital and convenient and secure and also privacy preserving, right, this gives us an opportunity to really streamline that while preventing a whole bunch of fraud and over-collection risk. Onto another example, you need policy to go with the technology. So Utah is a state that's been leading on the policy innovation for privacy and also digital identity. Earlier this spring, Governor Cox signed into law Senate Bill 260, which talks about state-endorsed digital identity. It basically says that the state doesn't issue your identity because whatever the state can issue, it can take away. However, the state may endorse your identity in a way that is useful to you if you meet its requirements. And you can take that endorsement and do identity verifications and meet compliance requirements to basically be able to go about the world, right? So that model works a lot for people, and it is also very strongly aligned with a lot of the recommendations from the ACLU for digital identity programs at the state level, including the right to paper or plastic credentials. If you don't want to use the digital system, it's not forced onto you. If you want to be able to use it, it's not going to track you. Right? So these are constitutionally based protections in Senate Bill 260 that became the state code earlier this year. It binds all future digital identity programs in Utah. And many other states are interested in this model, and it is not one-sided. It's basically across the board. A lot of people think that this is a good model, and we're starting to see this policy innovation come about. We have all the technology that we want to protect privacy, but unless you have the backstop of policy to make sure that is the law of the land, it is really hard to ensure that people actually have privacy. This is an example that we demonstrated at the State Endorsed Digital Identity Summit that happened earlier this year at Utah Valley University. And we played the video, please. So in this example, you're going to use your state endorsed digital identity to open a bank account as part of FinCEN's customer identification program requirements. This is a flow that involves having email verification, SMS verification. One day we'll all move to passkeys, but we're not quite there yet. And then you'll also be able to enter your social security number, which is a requirement for banking at least. And at this next juncture, basically the old way to do it is upload these JPEGs of your documents, right? And then someone reviews it and everything, right? But the new way is to just have a secure session where you're able to transmit the selectively disclosed fields, right? As you heard about, it could be using zero knowledge or more traditional techniques, letting the user choose which wallet it comes out of and have the optionality as to what they disclose or not to meet the compliance requirements. And when that gets sent over, there's a digital signature that cannot be forged by AI, right? So that helps secure information get to the recipient that can then use that as digital evidence, right? So we're hoping that this can be seen as documentary evidence as part of the Bank Secrecy Act, because we believe that this is going to produce a more convenient, faster, and more fraud-free experience. So all this combined, where we have this growing momentum across the technology innovations, which, by the way, are in over 17 states. There's a website called MDL Connection that you can go to and see all the active digital identity pilots. We have the policy as well getting figured out so that it is constitutionally based protections for use of digital identity. And we have a lot of the use cases, especially in the digital assets ecosystem, as you've seen here today, that require identification, right, in a streamlined manner. So all this puts it in the right direction. So what do we need from here, right? Well, fortunately, there's a body of work that I think is very important to bring up at NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology. They have a program called the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, where they literally research how do we use digital ID for purposes of banking KYC, access to healthcare benefits, and also government benefits more generally, right? Those are, I think, the 3 research tracks. I recommend looking it up. I think that work is a collective effort. In the first research track with financial institutions, it was financial institutions talking to tech companies, talking to regulators and NIST itself. How do we find the best practices for industry there? And I think that it is a shoo-in for the digital assets industry for us to consider the work output from that group. I think also ensuring that we're able to get accurate numbers on fraud is critical, so we know where to apply a lot of the different research and techniques. So allowing for Treasury to collaborate with more technical institutions like NIST and come up with joint recommendations would be a really great way, I think, to lever the existing work that has happened and the great momentum we're seeing across the different states, because identity is being driven by the states. And I think that is the way that it will be in this country. I think it's better to keep it decentralized. It's harder to attack that way. You don't have one silo with everyone's identity that can be either misused or it can basically be compromised by adversaries, right? By keeping it more spread out and having it federated at the protocol level seems to be a much better approach. And finally, here's an example about the future that's possible, where we're talking about disaster relief payouts after, let's say, a hurricane or some kind of natural disaster happens, right? Let's play the video. And you're trying to get funds to people who need it, who need to buy basic necessities, right? What are ways that we can do that without opening the doors to massive fraud? A lot of these same protections can be used for financial securities to increase ownership of assets for Americans. So in this example, you see a web form, a very nice one, but it is pretty onerous to fill out all those fields, right? You have to put all your information in. You might have 2 dependents. So if you have kids, then you might need extra funds to make sure that the whole family is okay, right? And you might have some other important information like proof of income that they're requesting, right? So when we move to a world with digital wallets that are controlled by users, and they can basically share what they want to decide, you can scan that. You can choose what wallet you want to use for the experience. And you're able to see all the data before it goes out. Who's getting it? What framework is it being released under? For example, privacy framework in California or somewhere else. And being able to understand where the data comes from. When you have privacy-preserving digital credentials that are your driver's license, your W-2, your birth certificates for your kids, all in one place that is not surveilled, and you can choose how to share it, right? You can really breeze through these processes without incurring the fraud risk. So being able to get to that point, and you can basically receive the funds how you pick. We saw a lot of great infrastructure talked about today for networks that allow for privacy, right? You could get stable coins out of this. If you want to meet obligations for virtual asset service providers sending assets, you might have to go through these checks. But getting them through a stable coin could be a really fast and expedient way, right? So that you can have it right away and start spending it. So basically, we have an opportunity to modernize the financial sector using these technologies, policies, thoughts that basically extol American values, right? So I think that by combining this and understanding what is the interface that's going to be seamless, it's going to be secure, It's going to have the right kind of protections built in, right? That is how I'm hoping to move forward. I'm very optimistic. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. Well, we've heard from our speakers, and we want to give the audience a chance. We've got a few minutes before we break. If you have a burning question, feel free to. We've got mics in the audience, in the aisle. So now's our time to hear from you. I know I've asked a couple of questions. Anything that's burning, please do come up, and we will hear your question. And I see someone. Oh, I thought someone was just walking to the side, but please feel free to come on up. And our first person, yes. Do you want to say where you're from? Your affiliation? Is that mic working over there? Maybe you might have to press. There we go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Kristen Bose-Hayes, formerly of FinCEN, and my question is for Zuko. I was just wondering if you could speak to Zcash's efforts to meet regulatory obligations like the travel rule around things like messaging fields or shielded transactions or viewing keys or things like that, and whether you think maybe there's an opportunity for regulators to actually ask more of developers around, privacy enhancing technologies via regulation, if there's an opportunity there, and whether you think your efforts have been a success. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll try to answer. Turn it on. Press. Oh.
Okay, how about now?
Yep.
That was a big question. I'll try to answer one part at least. You asked, can regulators ask developers to do more? And I really like that question because I'm a developer who's written a lot of software, like uploaded it to the internet. But nowadays, Zcash isn't under the control of the developers anymore. It's under the control of the users. It's like Bitcoin, like you could ask a Bitcoin developer to write some Bitcoin code that would do something different with Bitcoin. Maybe it would raise the 21 million cap to 22 million. You could probably get a developer to do that, especially if you paid him, or if you're a regulator and you ask him to do it and he chose to comply. But you can't get the Bitcoin users to run that code. And so it is with Zcash. I can write whatever code I want, but I can't get the Zcash users to run it. I don't know if that helps, but that's my honest answer to that part of your question.
Yeah, what about, and I think maybe the question goes to others on the panel as well in terms of, well, what is happening, right? Is this a black and white issue, an on and off issue? Because it seems like what we've talked about here are varying ways to address risk. So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in.
Yeah, I'll say if the asset is run by the users, then I think, Zuko, you're completely right. If it's a different type of asset, let's say it's a bond issued by a corporation or a government, then a regulator can go see that issuer because there's a specific issuer. I think there's a major difference between a kind of issuer-less asset and an asset issued by a given entity. I think the question follows more the asset issued by a given issuer, and it's more challenging for an asset that is issuer-less to be followed the same regulation.
Yes, Jill, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add that at least my experience of building these types of products in the space, most of the time you are interfacing with, ironically, a sort of intermediaries. So, if you're building a new blockchain with a new asset, you might be interfacing with the likes of Coinbase and exchanges who are giving you guidance on what they'll need in terms of things like view keys. And, if you are, I would imagine, a product like Canton serving many enterprise customers, you'll probably be interfacing with them. And I think that there is a huge opportunity for net new products being developed today by developers. It's less relevant perhaps to things that have been existing for the last 10 years, but for the likes of FinCEN and regulators to engage directly with industry, certainly, instead of us having to kind of rely on what exchanges or other parties are telling us.
Other questions from the audience? Okay, gentleman sitting down right there, come right up.
Hello. I'm Charlie Chen from Taiwan Anti-Money Laundering Virtual Asset Association. So I have a question for Ko. So you mentioned that kind of a futuristic way we can balance compliance and privacy is through like smart privacy. Like, so the smart contract deployer can deploy like measure to control this risk, to mediate this risk. But I want to ask more about like realistically how to actually managing this deployer to make sure that they implement sufficient parameters to prevent illicit players. Do you think it's rely on the regulator to kind of check on individuals, or it's rely on the infrastructure deploy to make sure that people deploy smart contract on the blockchain can be compliant with these regulations? Thank you.
I think it's going to be a combination of both, right? The developers, the businesses, the companies that are deploying the smart contracts, they need to understand their left and right lateral limits, so there needs to be some sort of guidance. But like I said in my speech, or my presentation, or my discussion, I guess it's not a presentation here, as you see, the key to all of this is programmability. When you have the ability to program smart contracts, you can meet whatever requirements are pretty much asked of you. And I think this kind of gets the question, or the previous question, the main difference in the state of Zcash is that it doesn't have programmability, right? You kind of get what you get. You can either get a shielded transaction or a transparent transaction. But on platforms or blockchains like Alio, you can define whatever parameters that you need to in order for your risk mitigation requirements. I mean, and I guess, you go for it. You can talk about what we're doing.
Yeah, I can chime in a little bit on this as well, given our work with Alio. So I think speaking also to the earlier question that was answered, if you have a centralized organization that's building on the Alio blockchain or building a smart contract-based application, then the question is do they have the tooling to be able to go and enforce their specific requirements that they need for risk management purposes? And so then it's on other organizations such as ourselves, like at Predicate, where we build that infrastructure, allowing for centralized organizations, asset issuers, fintechs building financial products to be able to enforce those requirements within their smart contract infrastructure when they use a blockchain like Alio.
So may I ask a follow-up question?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So for a lot of on-chain like investigation, so for example, you say programmable, which I notice usually it will connect to, let's say, using like TRM or Chainalysis data to ensure that there's no illicit players that using the, through a smart contract. However, if like slowly there's more and more privacy-based blockchain, does that kind of like in a bigger scale, basically all these like on-chain intelligence company, they cannot look, kind of hard for them to collect data anymore. Does it slowly like decrease the ability that we can prevent illicit player to use in your environment?
Is that a question for me?
For everyone, I think.
Sure. I think you're correct in some capacities, but as I said, there's no playbook for this, right? We're at the leading edge of the leading edge when it comes to this type of technology. And so what we're seeing as we engage all these stablecoin issuers, at least at Alio, is that everyone is going to experiment with new techniques. There are some folks that are going to be looking at selective disclosures, experimenting with view keys. Other folks are going to require verified credentials, maybe at the wallet level, and they're just going to require to know that there's some sort of validation that the entities participating aren't on some sort of OFAC sanctioned list. As to the question of whether TRM, Chainalysis, and Elliptic are going to have to change their business models, I think it depends. I think on the iterations that are going to use view keys, then in those scenarios, there will be data to whoever has a custody of a view key, right? And so they can still do sanctions monitoring or wallet screening if they have access to that. In instances where there is no view key, then yeah, it's they probably need to find a new business model.
Thank you.
Yeah, to add to this too, so of the approximately, $300 billion of US dollar denominated stablecoins, you got to think that some percentage of that wants more privacy. And there's a ton of stablecoins that aren't on chain yet that would come on chain if there is privacy, right? So what that means is that I think that we're going to see an increase in demand for privacy preserving blockchains. And that technology will mature and it'll get to cheap and good enough to the point where it's like a little add-on that doesn't cost you much in terms of transaction fees or performance cost, right? So if you believe in that argument, then we'll see a lot of stuff move into the privacy layer, right? So the real question is, what do we need to basically make sure that illicit finance can be countered? How do we make sure that investigations work in the new world? And a bunch of other considerations that, grateful that folks working on the technology are willing to come to the table and talk about it, right? So that's my hope, that regulators continue to engage industry and we can have those discussions on how do we keep privacy for folks while also having tools that are useful.
There's also precedent for this that's already set, right? Like someone spoke earlier, cash is private. And it's perfectly legal for somebody to deposit cash at a bank. They'll probably have to answer to some sort of suspicious activity report depending on how much money they're depositing, and they'll have to prove their source of funds, but there are frameworks for things like this that exist already today. There aren't microchips in physical dollars, right, where someone can trace every single interaction that has occurred.
Yeah, I'll add that we've been working with several stablecoin issuers and banks in the US and EU that have issued on Canton, and the technology is different, but the procedure and processes are unchanged. So their compliance department are asking the same thing. It's just that the tech needed to produce the same evidences is slightly different, and they sometimes work with some of the company you mentioned. Sometimes they have their in-house tools to extract the data from the distributed ledger in order to comply with the requirement. But the requirements have not changed, and they have to comply whether you're a bank or a stablecoin issuer.
And the last thing I just want to say on this is that these analytics firms that you're mentioning, they're not necessarily exclusive to the US, right? There are other nation states that might be adversarial, that might be developing or probably already have developed these capabilities. And so it's not necessarily in our interests to be able to have all this data exposed and analyzed and collected by everyone in the world. So I just kind of want to leave with that they can have chain analysis or the equivalent in less favorable nation state.
Yep. We've got a question here. This might be our last question. We just have a couple minutes.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so I kind of have a two-part question. I think the first part is the nature of blockchains tends to be kind of global, and there are different regulations everywhere. But even just focusing from a U.S. perspective, there's a lot of conversation on illicit finance and things like that. But as blockchain and crypto gets more regulated, I think there needs to be kind of a permissioned and permissionless version of some of these things, because if you have someone that is not on a list but they're manipulating a market, the regulators are going to need to come in and see who actually did that. And anything where that can't happen, especially like as you look at now, Bitcoin is now kind of officially regulated by the CFTC. You can't go around and manipulate the price of commodities, right? That's illegal. And so how are you going to balance the need for regulators to go in and actually see who or what is making a particular trade so that they can actually do their job and prevent not just the illicit stuff, but market manipulation?
Yeah, I would still quote the analogy of HTTPS that I really liked. Internet is global, but you can regulate industries in the US, in Asia differently, but they both use the internet. So I think that the protocol, the chain can be global, doesn't mean you can't have a specific jurisdiction and specific requirement in a given jurisdiction. I think you can decouple the two, and I think you want a technology that can decouple the two.
And you also said, when you started out, you said that there's now more regulation that's coming, and what we have to keep in mind is activities are regulated. Companies that are doing certain activities are regulated. So I think the gap that we're caught up in is just that a lot of these activities, these are old activities, whether it's derivatives trading, securities trading, trading of all types of assets, those activities are regulated, but the gap is how do we fit that into the blockchain environment? And I'll probably maybe put a preview to what's going to happen. Maybe this is actually a good segue since it's almost 3 o'clock. What we're going to do in this next segment is discuss the sort of spectrum of policy approaches, what's happening from a variety of speakers where we've assembled. This is my segue for the next segment before we break. So we've got quite a few bright minds that we'll introduce for the second segment to talk not just about this, but about the range of issues as we go from the tech, which you've seen in our first segment. You've seen these different solutions. You've seen the importance of privacy. And what we're going to do when after we take this break is we're going to talk about, okay, so how does this get real? How do we make this from a policy perspective? How do we translate this into implementation on a wide level? And I think we're going to have a very robust discussion, a variety of views, but we're all focused on privacy. And if you do come back, I promise, some of you, if you've ever seen stuff that I've moderated, there are going to be pop culture references. I'm going to bring in some movies as I frame up my comment, the conversation. But we're going to come back and have a very, very good discussion after our 30-minute break. So Samira, should I hand it over to you to tell us what's next?
Yeah, thank you. All right, thanks everyone for hanging in there. Can we hear me? I can shout. I have a bunch of kids, so I'm used to it. Well, thank you to our panelists. If we could give another round of applause to them. They did a great job. It's a brilliant group. Honestly, look them up. I know there are other questions in the audience. I'm sure all of them could talk privacy and blockchain all day long, so please feel free to follow up with them either online or in our breakout side. I'm hoping that, for one, all of this technological development means I don't have to remember dozens of passwords anymore, especially if I put 1, 2, or 3 exclamation marks at the end of each one. And I want to thank all of you who came in person today. I grew up in Michigan, where even if there's a foot, okay, eye contact, yeah, all right, I'll talk to you after. I grew up in Michigan, where even a foot of snow doesn't stop us from going to anything. But here in D.C., if the weather dips under 40 degrees, most of the city is not going to leave their homes. So you guys are especially brave for being out here. I've been having meetings across D.C. on financial privacy, and it's on the front of mind for so many regulators and people, and it should be. I want you to think of your day today. Did you tap in at the Metro? Did you buy a coffee and tap in there? Did you send some money to your kids' holiday party fundraisers because the teachers need presents? If you didn't, this is your PSA to Venmo the parent that's been harassing you. All of these things are places where our private information is circulated at unprecedented rates, and that allows for relatively easy surveillance of all of us. It's not only what we transacted, but where we were when we transacted. So my digital electronic footprint could tell you exactly where I've been all day and where I will be later today as well. We don't have to live this way. There's an arguably better balance between privacy and national security. Our next panel will delve into that, as Yaya previewed, and I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. I hope to see you all there. And if you were able to follow my financial footprint this morning, you would know that we're about to enjoy some donuts outside from my favorite donut shop in D.C. So please go ahead, refresh, and then we'll see you back here at 3:30.